Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show in association with DavidIke.com.
My next guest was with us last spring, so it's been a long time since he was on the programme. We loved him then, and I'm delighted he's back now. He's the editor of Health Freedom News and also the president and legal counsel for the National Health Federation. A terrific man. Lovely to welcome him back to the programme. Taking time out of his busy schedule to chat with us. Let's welcome back Scott Tips. Scott, hello, how are you?
Hi, Richie. I'm fine. Thank you very much.
And welcome back. And this is the last time I will say this because it's now January the 12th, but Happy New Year to you and to yours. There has to be a cut-off time, Scott, when you stop saying that. We'll make it today. No, sincerely, great to have you back. It's been a long time. Terrific when you were on last. We, in recent days, and even in the run-up to Christmas, on this particular programme, have been talking with guests about the content of our food and alarmist press releases coming from government departments, not just here in Britain, but in Ireland and in the United States, about obesity levels and sickness amongst young children and all sorts of that. And I said to myself, we've got to get Scott Tips back on the programme to talk about Codex Alimentarius because, as I mentioned before getting you on, it's my belief, even though I haven't done any sort of survey, but I'm guessing that maybe 9 out of 10 people have never heard of it. How would you go about introducing somebody, Scott, to Codex Alimentarius and what it is?
Well, that's a very well put question, Richie. I would tell them that it's an organization, an international organization that was created 53 years ago that is intended to harmonize and make all the international food standards and guidelines apply to every single person in the world so that it all comes from one source. And as a result, the power would all be focused and concentrated in one set of hands.
When you were on with me last, even though my friend and colleague David Ike had been writing about Codex sporadically over the years, I didn't really know anything about it. And one of the first things that nearly knocked me off my chair is that you told me when you were last on. And of course, when I did my little bit of research into it, I discovered you were 100% right. And that is that this whole idea and the launch of this was by Nazi war criminals. Do you want to talk about that?
Well, I could talk about it. The Nazi war criminal part goes a bit into the origins from I.G. Farben and others, but I'm actually not the one who talks about it so much, Richie. It's really more some other people who have stated its sordid origins in the really in the Second World War through I.G. Farben and some of these other pharmaceutical and chemical and just basically war production companies who decided this was another way to kind of gain control of our food and hence of the people.
Absolutely. No, you're absolutely right. We're not going to get into that particular aspect of it in any great depth, but I just wanted to mention to people that Hermann Schmitz and Fritz Termeer, avowed Nazi war criminals taken to the United States were behind this, we're right in the middle of this, along, of course, with the Rockefeller and the Rothschild families. I mean, it's incredible. And it only takes kind of a cursory examination, doing your own little bit of research online to find out this, but it's just worth mentioning, Scott.
Yes. Well, that's basically the thrust of it. But I just have to say, and I'm not often a defender of Codex, but most of in the last 16, going on 17 years now that I've been attending Codex meetings personally, this is kind of an old story, sort of like who founded the United States? Does it really impact the day-to-day now of what the United States is? And it's sort of that way is my own personal feeling at Codex. The people who are kind of running it and attending the meetings and the like, they're either very gullible fellow travelers or or they just are unaware of the origins, and they don't know the origins. They don't really care about the origins, and so I see a lot of the harm coming not from the origins of Codex, but coming from the ill will or outright ignorance of the delegates at the Codex meetings these days in the last 16 years that I've been around. Now, I don't fool myself. There are certain elements there who have their marching orders as to what to do, and things do get done, but there actually have been some victories at Codex as well that show that it doesn't always go their way. So that's sort of my take on the situation, but then I'm sort of in the forest chopping the trees, and sometimes it's harder to see the entire forest.
Yeah.
But I do get a view from kind of both perspectives, and this is one of them, that there are actually some really good people in Codex. There are actually some really bad people in Codex. It's not some sort of monolithically evil entity. I see it more as an entity that's been, it may have had sordid origins, and then it's been captured by the pharmaceutical industry and big agricultural industry. And so we're looking at fighting them as much as anything. But then that's the story we've had for decades, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's been co-opted, really, is what you're saying, by big pharma and by nefarious interests. One of the things... Go on.
This is the problem, Richie, sorry to cut you
off. No,
off.
go ahead.
But I think it's an important point, because there's so many people out there, including amongst our listeners, who are really on the right page, but they seem to think they have this mistaken belief in some sort of honesty of government or something. They seem to see the government as the way to come in and offset these big evil corporations, sort of like, Godzilla now fighting the monster from outer space and being on our side or something. But it's really not that way. It's really a case of Hitler versus Stalin. So, and you can choose which is which. It doesn't really matter. They're really the same. And so by building up government, all people are doing is some sort of counterweight to these big corporations. All they're doing is playing exactly into the hands of big pharma and big agriculture. They are giving those companies, those big corporations, the power to use a club against us. Because how can they do it? Through a true free market system. They can't really force us to go into Tesco and buy their products, can they? No, they can't. But through the government, which enacts laws and coercive rules and regulations, they sure can. They can outlaw the competition. They can restrict the competition. They can bankrupt the competition through heavy regulation or heavy taxes or police attacks or things of that sort. And so what we need to keep in mind is that whenever we think the counterweight to big corporations is to give more power to the government, we're actually wrong. We need to take that power away, and then we'll see the power of the big corporations diminish. And that's at least our viewpoint at NHF. Now, it's not to say that we don't believe in certain rules and
standards,
rule of law and the like. Obviously, we do. But that's what we need. We need to go back to those rules and laws that actually count and apply.
What's amazing about Codex, and it's covered in David's latest book, Phantom Self, is when you look back at it, and you look back at what J.D. Rockefeller did in terms of his involvement in setting up the American Medical Association, which led to, and of course that was in the mid-1800s to mid-19th century, and what that led to basically was standardizing medicine and making pharmaceutical companies' medicine basically the be-all and the end-all, and marginalising and eventually outlawing alternative medicine. And this is massive, isn't it, Scott? And this you could do 2 hours on this alone, on the agenda behind this, and the resulting impact that it's had then on us and on our children and on our families. And when I announced you were coming on yesterday, many of our listeners are well aware of who you are, and they're very familiar with the with the NHF and all the work you do there. And the most common question I was asked to put to you was, Richie, what can we do if we're living in urban areas? Now, I'm paraphrasing about 50, 60 questions into one question. If we're living in urban areas, we don't have any land, we can't grow anything for ourselves, we can't produce our own food, we are dependent to live by going down the supermarket. And we see that our children and our nieces and nephews are not eating very much. They're not gorging themselves on food, but they're overweight, they're lethargic, they're fatigued, they're tired, they're not doing so well in school. What the bloody hell can we do about that? That's the most common question I was asked to put to you today. And I know there's probably no easy answer to this, Scott.
Well, is the question kind of about avoiding obesity?
Avoiding having to survive on the foodstuffs, the food that some of us have no choice but to buy from supermarkets, from big markets, knowing full well that a lot of that food is not really nutritious. I mean, you've written so much about malnutrition. And basically people are saying, what the hell can we do for ourselves?
Okay, I think I get the general gist of it as opposed to some of the specifics, but I'll go into some of the specifics as well. The main thing that people can do, and in terms of weight, I've kept the same weight I've had for, since I was 18 years old. I probably haven't varied more than a pound or two in weight. And one reason I've succeeded is I'm not entirely successful, of course, in avoiding certain foods, but you want to avoid processed foods as much as possible. But it's not just processed per se. It's foods that have trans fatty acids, that have the bad fats in them, and that have the artificial sweeteners in them, and even, of course, sugar and the like, and to avoid soda drinks, these especially diet drinks. Any of those are the kiss of death to your health, and you'll live longer and you'll live a higher quality length of life if you avoid those things, especially if you see anything with glucose syrup in it. Glucose syrup is ubiquitously in our foods, whether it's on the store shelves in England, Ireland, France, or in the U.S., especially in the U.S. and Canada. They add it to everything. Most ice creams that you buy in the supermarket have glucose syrup in it. Just look at the labels and don't buy those that have it, because they'll make you fat. And guaranteed you will get fat from that. The other thing that's so important is that whenever you eat a carbohydrate, make sure you eat it with oil. There are a lot of people who say, oh yes, but that adds calories and I'm a calorie counter. Well, forget that. You need the oil to slow down the absorption of the carbohydrate through your stomach and to keep it from giving you a sugar rush, which is basically especially what simple carbohydrates like white bread and white flour will do to you. And so to slow it down, you need to eat it with butter or whatever you're eating, or olive oil or coconut oil, or whatever is the appropriate oil for the food. But in any event, a good natural oil, and that will slow down the absorption process and you'll gain less weight, even though, true, it's adding more calories. But to get to your overarching kind of question, or your listeners' questions, and that is that really, yes, you're in an urban area, you have to go to a supermarket. Well, try to buy the basics, brown rice, eggs, if you do eat eggs. Try to get them organic whenever you can. I know they lie about organic at times, but you're more apt to get an organic product if you buy organic than if you don't.
Than if you don't.
Any dairy products especially, you want to buy organic. That means milk, cheese, butter, eggs. And the reason for that is because in your and my body and those of animals, where are the toxins stored to protect your body? They're stored in the fat cells. So here you have a cow that's been grazing. Let's even say it's been grazing on grass, but chemtrails have put chemicals into the ground. Or in the case of Ireland, they've been drinking fluoridated water, or who knows what. And it goes into their system, and they And where do they store the toxins, the various chemicals, the drugs, the antibiotics, and so on? They store them in the fat cells. Well, you eat non-organic butter, you're getting a high concentration there at the top of the food chain. So it's super, super important to eat those kind of things organically. If you can't afford organic rice, okay, so be it. But at least insist on organic food and products that have fat cells in them. The other thing is that in the city, and you can Google this and look them up, in the US certainly, in Canada certainly, and I believe in the UK, there are these cooperatives, food cooperatives, buying cooperatives, and you can go join those. And if not, why not start one yourself? This would be a good business for anyone. You go out to the countryside, you find a local farmer, especially one who's doing things right, organically or sustainable agriculture, and make a deal with him or her or them and say, look, if I can get a group of people together and we buy directly from you and you're selling to the supermarket, to Tesco for 8 cents a pound, we'll pay you 10 cents a pound and we both save money. You get 2 cents a pound more and we save 5 cents or 10 cents a pound, that kind of thing. So you either find such an outfit, usually called organic cooperatives or agricultural cooperatives, but you have to be careful. They're also just the cooperatives amongst the farms themselves, but find the consumer ones and then either join them or help them or both or become a customer of them. Or if you don't
or start one.
Yes, start one and become your own middle person on that and help feed yourselves and your neighbors and the like. And then the other thing to do is, you might have a little land of your own to grow some potatoes or tomatoes or something of the sort there. So you could try that as well. So those are some immediate things to be done. But the other thing is just to go and try to give business to those stores who will address your needs and your concerns. And one other thing you can do is go to the local markets, and it could still even be, some of your listeners may laugh, but let's say a Tesco, because they do have regional or individual store purchasing people, and you can talk to that person and say, look, I know a lot of us would like to get organic butter from Brazil or wherever it might be, I don't care. And would you start purchasing it for us? We will be buying it from your store. And that's another way to go, is to talk to the products purchasing manager at any local store, whether it be Tesco or a one-off mom and pop shop, and ask them to be the purchasers. So that's another way. And then the last thing I would add is we are now entering a time, and I laugh at myself a little bit because I said this about 45 years ago, but where we need to really start stockpiling some food supplies just in case. I think finally, after 45 years, we might actually be there where it would be good to lay up a supply of food that will last for a while. You can, store them in airtight containers. There's special ways of doing that, get water purifiers and the like. And I know it's easier said than done, but just to buy a little extra food, put the expiration date clearly on the top so you can rotate them in and out and keep some food available just in case worse comes to worse. It's sort of a fairly cheap form of insurance.
These are brilliant solutions, Scott. If you're just joining the program, the terrific Scott Tips is on with us. He's a California-based attorney, and as you know, because he's been on the program in the past, he specialised in food and drug law and trademark law, and he's talked a lot through the National it's the National Health Federation, and it's the nhf.com. I'm going to tweet out the link to that now, by the way, folks, is where you can find out more about Scott. Terrific articles and resource material on there. And we're talking about solutions. Now, we talked about glucose syrup earlier on. Number of questions about corn syrup and allergies to corn. That's one from Gio, and you might answer that. And then Richard Angelis asks a really good question on Twitter about Codex, asking Scott, is it a front to bring GMO food worldwide? global FDA standards to suit Monsanto to facilitate the creation of almost like a food coup by organizations like Monsanto. But we'll take the corn syrup one first. You mentioned glucose syrup. Should we avoid as much as possible corn syrup?
Oh, absolutely. You want to avoid corn syrup and corn syrup solids, and they hide them in very clever ways. Sometimes they will just say corn solids. And in fact, I was just looking at a label on infant formula, and I just pulled it up on my screen here. Similac, it's an infant formula, and at Codex, NHF has been fighting this for a long time. And anyone who's feeding a baby needs to avoid these like the plague. The number one ingredient is corn syrup solids, 42.6%. The number two ingredient is soy protein isolate, which sounds 14.7%, which sounds okay, except for one thing. Soy is very estrogenic. If you have a baby boy, you don't want to give him a lot of soy. Then you go through the list. I'll skip a few things. They have safflower oil, which I don't really recommend, but in any event, sugar is very high there. Soy oil again. Coconut oil, that's okay. And then it has a list of vitamins and so on. But the point is, to answer yours, it's corn syrup solids. So getting back to your listener's question, is Codex a front for GMO foods? Well, it's sort of taken that turn, hasn't it? Because we fought for GMO food labeling years ago at the Codex Committee on Food Labeling that's hosted by the Canadian government. Each committee is hosted by a particular government. And this committee, the food labeling one, is hosted in Canada, usually having its meetings in Ottawa. So NHF was there, and I argued along with the European Union. All of you listening from the European Union would be happy to know that, and Norway, that the EU argued very strenuously in favor of GM labeling. And you should know that even though none of us are really EU fans, I would suppose, the EU's Codex office has been absolutely formidable at fighting to protect you from toxins in your foods, including GMO, including recombinant bovine growth hormone, ractopamine, those kind of chemicals that are prolific in the US and Canada, in fact, in the Western Hemisphere.
But aren't we getting GMO in our diet anyway? Even, and I'm not contradicting what you said there about the European Union at all, but we got into, I mentioned this on the program a couple of nights ago. If you buy online pizza from Domino's in England and you ask for a thin and crispy base, they tell you that the base was made with GM soya. So they tell you this. And I was saying, wow, I didn't think that it was so easy for a company operating in Britain to, put GMO ingredients in your food. And a couple of listeners contacted me privately and said, Richie, you're being a bit naive. A lot of beef and a lot of lamb and a lot of meat on sale in British supermarkets, the animals were reared eating crops, GMO crops. And a little look into that, saw me discovering that they were in fact right, Scott. I think we're exposed to it in this country, in Britain. And I'm not trying to be, a scaremonger, but I think we are exposed to it on a daily basis anyway.
Yes. Well, I definitely agree. There are leaks in the hole. It's not. The EU pays an incredibly large fine every year because of a WTO decision where the WTO, the World Trade Organization, had ruled against the European Union in terms of blocking out GM foods. But there are enough leaks going through that you get things like you described there. And even in France, where I am, it happens. But in general, it's a lot safer in terms of GM food products there than it is in the U.S. So that's good. But getting back to that question, is Codex a front? And I use quote marks around the word front for GMO products. Well, I don't think it is. It's not that that's actually it's a good question actually, but it's not that it's a front for it. It's more that it's a vehicle that has been hijacked by certain interests to push GM foods, whether it's Brazil, Argentina, Mexico, Canada, the United States, or a number of others. But it doesn't mean to say that it's a front really kind of belittles those countries like Norway, Switzerland, the regions like the European Union, some African countries, and the like, Russia and China, who have actually fought against GMO foods. Maybe not China so much, but Russia has fought against GMO foods. And so I would not characterize it as a front, but rather as just a vehicle that is being used. Usually the victories of the Western Hemisphere over the old Eastern Hemisphere are just bare victories. You know, in the case of ractopamine, it was one vote back in, was it 2012 or 2013? They won by one vote to allow ractopamine to be sold worldwide. And that is how it really happens. But there's a lot of opposition there. And I don't mean to sound like an apologist for Codex. I've been critical of Codex for 20 years now, but there are some good people there in it who are fighting kind of our fight. And they come from the most curious of places. You'll find, for instance, the Iranian delegates have viewpoints very similar to yours and mine on the subject. The Malaysian delegate, the same thing. So you wouldn't expect that. And yet it happens.
Yet it happens. Scott Tipps is on the line. He's the editor of Health Freedom News, and he's the president and legal counsel for the National Health Federation. Terrific having him on. Loads and loads and loads of questions and interest in this, so I'm going to get to them now. Patrick Garrett says, Richie, if there becomes a shortage of food and we have food storage and we try to store our food, wouldn't the government outlaw it? Says Patrick. It's a cynical point of view, but I can understand where he's coming from. Peter was on to ask, would you ask Scott Richie about the benefits of taking vitamin C in large doses? We'll get to that in a second, Peter. Thanks for that. And Zana is listening in New Zealand. How you doing, Zana? Thanks very much for your comment. Zana tweets, Richie, 90% of what I eat now is from my local farmers market. Support your local produce growers, says Zana. However, Scott, Claire emailed me to say, Richie, couldn't agree more with Scott Tipps. He's 100% right. However, buying good food and buying organically produced food is more expensive than a lot of people can afford. So there is that kind of issue as well. But what about Zana from New Zealand saying that buy from your local produce growers? What about the counter argument to that? Well, it's very expensive, Scott, or it can be. But you talked about doing deals anyway, didn't you? I mean, there's always an answer.
Yeah, so you cut deals going directly to the local farmer, but I realize that takes time, trouble, and energy. A lot of us have 9 to 5 jobs. We have kids to rear. We have all sorts of things going on in our lives. How much time do we really have to trek out to the local farmer? But maybe you do it as kind of a vacation thing. Are you a vacation thing? I mean it more in the sense of a fun thing to do, and in place of maybe going to a movie. But you can also research people online and email them first before you go out there, or telephone them first before you go out there. Getting back to that first question, though, about stealing our stored food, I totally agree with it. And it may not even be the government stealing your stored food. You could see mobs going down the street, breaking into homes and taking the food. Unfortunately, in the UK, you don't have the right to defend yourselves with violent force against violent force. I see that as a real negative for the UK. You would have a lot less crime there if you actually had people able to defend their homes like in the old days. I mean, where else but in England was it that the expression was born, a man's home is his castle? Well, far from it now. So I agree with your one listener about the threat to the stored foods being stolen. I guess you have to be very good at hiding them as well. And you keep a little bit that they will grab, and then you hide the rest. So they'll be satisfied with a little bit, think they've gotten everything, but you've stored more in elsewhere that they don't get. So that's one way to go. With Peter on the vitamin C, although I thought it was Peter who asked about the stored food, but anyway, on the vitamin C doses, I talk about that a lot. And if we had not, let me just say very quickly, if humans had not lost the genetic ability to manufacture our own vitamin C endogenously, we would be making 24/7, we would be making 10,000 milligrams a day. That's 10 grams a day. So to take the measly 60 milligrams a day that they say we need is a joke. It's enough to keep you from getting scurvy, but there are a whole range of problems, health problems, that you would have by not getting optimal doses. But if you just remember two things about vitamin C, these are them. Number one, vitamin C is a fat-soluble vitamin, so it doesn't stay in your system very long. So it's not that helpful to take a whole bunch at one time unless you have a severe health problem, or bladder cancer or something like that. So the vitamin C circulates out through your bladder. By the way, they found that high-dose vitamin C does in fact help with bladder cancer because there's so much transiting through the bladder. It just wipes out, in many cases, it wipes out the cancer there. On the other hand, what it does mean, point number two, is you take it in divided doses. And by divided doses, that means instead of, say, taking 1.5 grams, that is 1,500 milligrams, all at one fell swoop, you take it 3 times a day in 500 milligram doses. Take 500 milligrams with lunch, breakfast, and dinner. And hopefully you don't eat the meals in that order. But anyway, you take it with breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And then you'll get a much better effect than if you took all 1,500 milligrams at once. And in fact, that's what I do. I take divided doses. This could be a corollary point number 3. I absolutely avoid taking time-release vitamin C, because what happens is you have a very acidic substance, vitamin C, that passes through your stomach, which is your acid environment, goes into your intestinal tract, which is highly alkaline, and it sits there, slowly dissolving with its high acidity against your alkaline intestinal tract walls. So what do you think might happen? It might burn holes in that, right? Well, that's what you don't want to have happen. So don't be lazy. Just get in the habit of taking some with your meals, and don't rely on eating just an orange or drinking orange juice, which if it's pasteurized, it's going to destroy most, if not all, of the vitamin C in it anyway. So that's what you want to do. And vitamin C is so ubiquitously necessary in our bodies for so many different purposes. You just have to have it every day.
Loads of questions, Scott. And some of our listeners want us to return to talking about the European Union on the powers to find the EU and countries within the EU and nation states. And this brings into play the whole idea of the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, and how ultimately we're, going down this road, which some of us have been talking about for a long time, of absolute global tyranny, where corporations like Monsanto and like other, some of the other big food producing companies can basically dictate the policies of individual sovereign nation states. And if those nation states go against them, they can sue them in arbitration courts like the say it for me again, Richie, international trade settlement disputes. How do I say that? I'm always getting that wrong. Investor state settlement disputes, I think, is what I'm trying to say there. It is tyrannical, isn't it? The idea is that the European Union, can be fined, or countries within it, at the behest of food-producing mega corporations.
Yes, well, it is the TTIP is a huge threat to all of us. Even Americans who think they'll come out ahead on it are going to lose big time. And all it is it's another example of the government as the thugs, the enforcement arm for big corporations. So why give the governments this kind of power that in turn is used by the corporations against us? So, this is they're part and parcel of the same problem. Big government, big corporations equal big problem. And so we want to try to get those down as much as we can. So we have to fight the TTIP. But how do you fight it? They're going to do it the same way as they've done with the the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP agreement, and the same way as they've done with the Canadian-European Union agreement as well, which was signed into law a couple of years ago. And so we have a situation where we really need to, probably the only way to attack it, besides letting people know about it so that they can start trying to do something about it, is it's just gone so far, and it's gone so quickly in many ways that you can only attack it by trying to reduce the power of government enough where they back out of these agreements and do that. But that's kind of, I'm very pessimistic at this stage on that sort of thing.
There's no talk about it, Scott. You can't turn on any mainstream news program, any cable channel that presents news documentaries, and you cannot hear a thing. Nothing is being said about the implications of the TTIP agreement. Nothing. It's disgustingly secret, isn't it? I mean, people are not allowed to look at we only know what's in it because of leaks as to the specifics of what's going to be in it. But investor trade settlement disputes is the term I was thinking of, which is the most terrifying thing, where, a mega corporation can basically hold a sovereign government to account because the sovereign government makes a decision that affects the bottom line of these companies. And that Monsanto are rubbing their hands with glee, and others, by the way, at the TTIP coming into existence. And ultimately, again, not to be a scaremonger, but that coming into existence brings about dystopia, Scott. It's here right now.
Well, the thing it does, I just want to say that perhaps and we've been seeing this lately with a lot of people boycotting products made by Monsanto. In fact, I was reading a report that Monsanto laid off or is in the process of laying off about 36, oh my gosh, I've now forgotten, is it 36,000 or 3,600 employees? And we see a lot of their bottom line being affected. So the more we can hurt their bottom line, which is the ultimate democracy that you and I have, is going out there spending £1 on a food product. If we withhold it from a product made by Monsanto, that's our individual blow against them, voting with pound democracy against those products and those companies. And we should do it anyway, in every way that we can. And ultimately, they will stand and fall on that, because ultimately we give the sanction to these people to do what they do. And if we withhold it, and if people of like mind withhold support, then we will ultimately prevail. We give it to our support to competitors as well. And if the competitors are outlawed, then perhaps the market goes underground.
Absolutely right. One of the things to do as well is anybody who does business with Monsanto, any other company that provides Monsanto with anything or that deals with Monsanto in any way, shape or form, boycott those companies' products and just don't give them, your hard-earned cash. We often hear about boycotting Israeli products by those of us who disagree with Israeli foreign policy and what it does to Gaza. And that must be having some effect, because any chance he gets, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu calls it anti-Semitic and calls it evil. It must be having some effect. So I absolutely agree with that, Scott. We've got about 3 minutes left on this, Scott. It's been terrifically informative for people. It really has. It's essential that people understand what's happening with their food, where all this is going with Codex and with TTIP, as we've been touching on now. I'll give you the last couple of minutes, Scott, to wrap it up. And you've given plenty of solutions here, which is terrific, because one of the things I've always been really keen for the programme to do is to offer viable solutions to people and give them, hope that this isn't going to end necessarily the way that the establishment, the elite, the agenda wants it to end. So I'll give you the last word on it, my friend, and then we'll have to close the program. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. And I'm sorry to all of you who had questions that I couldn't answer. I love this way of interacting, by the way, Richie. So maybe we could do this again in the near future.
In the very near future, Scott.
Yes,
I'll make sure
very
of it.
near future, and we could have it where more questions are answered, especially Donna's about the support local growers and that she likes that, and the organic being expensive. That sort of thing are very real questions that need to be addressed, or statements that need to be addressed as well. But bottom line is that although I'm pessimistic, I think it's sort of, it's darkest before you see the light. And ultimately, we will win. It's just getting through this very tough time that we're facing now. So we do that by increasing our own sense of and actuality of responsibility. Be responsible for your own actions. Don't depend on the government or others for anything if you can avoid it. That is, go out and take action on your own to store your own food, to buy the right food, to inform yourself, and to not be lulled into, let me try to inoculate your readers here, our listeners here, by saying not to be lulled into a sense of false security through the mainstream media. That's why it's so critical that they continue to listen to programs such as yours, Richie, because you're the one getting the truth out there. And this is what will help enable them to survive. The ones who won't survive the hard times to come will be those who are listening to the mainstream media, told everything's fine, the government's here to protect you, we'll take care of you, and that's it. And so you do not want to fall into that way of thinking, but rather take action on your own. Take some vitamins. Yes, all of these things have a cost to them, but try to give up the money in other areas that are not as essential. Maybe you don't buy that DVD or download that music or whatever it might be that's costing you, or you don't go to that fancy party one night and you save the money for other things. But just think about what could be done and increase local contacts with your neighbors and with the local farmers, and make a sense of community so that when the hard times really do come, much harder than now, you'll already have the network built up. You'll already have someone to look after you in that sense, and that network, that close-knit network, and you won't be wondering, is my neighbor trustworthy or not? You'll have already found out. And so you'll be more likely to take the appropriate action. And definitely do not believe anything the government tells you. In fact, you can usually count on the exact opposite. If they tell you one thing, it's probably true the opposite. So those are my parting lines. And work with us at the National Health Federation. We need your support. We don't get big government or big corporation support. We're only able to go to Codex and fight for you by individual donations. There in the UK, we have a great group of people, NHF UK, and they can use not only money, but they could use volunteers. So if you have an interest in that, then contact us. You can contact us through our website, thenhf.co.uk or thenhf.com, and let us know that you're available. We'd welcome your support.
Brilliant, Scott. Terrific way to end it. I'll tweet out those links again, the nhf.co.uk, nhf.com. Brilliant stuff. We will arrange for you to come back on in a month or so for a bit of an extended chat. We'll get you on for a bit longer because there were lots more comments and questions coming in there. There's no doubt about that. And anybody who wants to see them needs only go to our Twitter account, put in Richie Allen Show, all one word, press enter, and you'll see what everybody else was saying. Scott, really enjoyed it. Thanks for your time. Thanks for all the work you do, and continued success to you and your colleagues.
Thank you. Thank you, Richie. Very much appreciate it. I look forward to our next time together.
Can't wait for it. Scott Tips on the line to us there from France. Terrific to have him on the programme.